And that's the danger of BRICS, is that BRICS is it 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 is representative of a whole new mindset that's taking, grab in the world today that puts the economy ahead of the military. And until the United States breaks free of that paradigm, this military first, this need to build the greatest and strongest military in the world, it doesn't do you any good when China dominates. What's going to happen? Donald Trump, I'm going to take over the Panama Canal because the Chinese have control of it. Well, they don't. They have Chinese management companies out of Hong Kong manage it. But you know what the Chinese will have control of pretty soon? They put a couple $1 billion port in Peru, and they're now building high-speed rail connectivity between Peru and Brazil. And so now Chinese ships can come to Peru. They don't have to go through the Panama Canal, offload their cargo on a massive scale, and get that shipped into Brazil, bypassing the Panama Canal. What's Trump going to do about that? Because that's happening as we speak. See, this is what happens when you put too much emphasis on defending this geographically important canal. This is the most important thing in the world. We need to control this transit here, da da da. But what happens when China goes, we don't care. We're landing in Peru, and then we're putting it on a ship on trains, and they're going to get to Brazil before your ship can even get through the canal. Donald Trump needs better Chinese advisors too. Trump is an egotist, and he keeps saying that, I know Xi better than anybody else. I have deep insight to this man. He doesn't know anything about Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin have a deep friendship, not just not just a friendly relationship as president, but friendship themselves. They truly like each other. They get along with each other. And the idea that Trump is going to come in and break this friendship apart, what does Trump have to offer? Nothing. And now you've shown yourself to be a friend of China, and now they might listen to you when you talk about Russia and things of that nature. But China owes Trump nothing. And Trump has nothing on China. There's nothing he can bring to the table. So this is ridiculous that he's somehow going to play the two sides off against each other. I mean, it's interesting what he's doing with Taiwan right now, sanctioning the Taiwanese chip makers and all this stuff. If I were the Taiwanese, I go ahead and accept the fact that America's not a friend. I've been telling them so all along, and that their best course of action is to turn to the Xi Jinping right now and say, how do we do this? What do we need to do? We can't deal with this person anymore. We don't know what the hell this is. We need to have that, one nation, two systems approach. Let's do that now and just leave the United States in the lurch, because that's the direction it's heading. We'll abandon Taiwan because we don't stand for anything. Now, again, if Trump was smart, he would go to China and say, I want to work with you on bringing it into the Taiwan crisis and, in a way that satisfies you and satisfies us. You get political capital out of that. China builds high-speed trains better than anybody, and Russia builds icebreakers better than anybody. And if you're going to be using the northern, northwest passages and all that, you need icebreakers. And if you're going to be shipping stuff across the South American continent, you need high-speed trains. And we can't compete in either one of those. We're too busy talking about seizing control of the Panama Canal and seizing control of Greenland. So we haven't improved anything. And all we've done is create tension and expectations, because now that becomes our territorial waters, and we have to build icebreakers that we don't have the shipbuilding capacity to do. Meanwhile, Russia has all the icebreakers in the world, and they're just running around breaking ice. The Chinese are building a fleet of icebreakers. They're outproducing our ship production 240 to 1. Let's make it a little bit higher, because the China's going to say, we need to build icebreakers, and they're going to build icebreakers. We're focused on legacy thinking about, the importance of things that were, geopolitically important, 30 years ago, forgetting that the world has changed and that the people that we're competing against are better at the critical aspects of this competition than we are. How's the United States going to handle that? Go to war? Threaten Peru? Deploy the U.S. Fourth Fleet off the coast of Peru to blockade the port? We're not thinking right. We're not thinking strategically. Especially Donald Trump. It's just a very simplistic approach to things. Greenland, let's take that. Let's say he gets control of Greenland. How many icebreakers does the United States have? Not that many. Not enough. My understanding is that the Deep Six didn't make use of new Chinese emerging technologies. But what we do know, though, is that China has, you know, mastered certain technologies that the West has tried to deny it access to. And that's the mistake. We don't respect China. We don't. We always think that China is what we like to call near peer, meaning they're not quite our peers. They're close, but they're not as good as we are. When the reality is we're not even near peer to China on some of these things, that China is so far ahead of us. This deep six phenomena, the tanking of NVIDIA, it just happened. And so I have to tell you that, I've read about it, but I can't sit here and tell you, you know, exactly how this happened and why it happened and what it means. It's too soon. It would require also to answer that question, you'd have to have a lot more insight into, China's approach, et cetera. Was this a fluke? Was this, part of an overall strategy? What happened here? It's too early to say. But I would say that whatever the answer is, it's going to be grounded in reality. It's not going to be, you know, cooking of the market and, fantasy and all this stuff. It'll be fact based. And that puts the Trump administration at a disadvantage because they have a very artificial, superficial understanding of China. First of all, I don't think NATO has common purpose anymore. Clearly, the United States is not looking for the same thing that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and Poland are looking for. Germany's focus is on something other than what Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland are looking for. France is worried about different things. Italy's worried about different things. France and Germany don't agree. Italy doesn't agree with France and doesn't agree with Germany. Great Britain's not part of the European equation anymore. They don't agree with anybody. And the United States is looking out for the United States. So the concept of a unified Europe, a unified NATO is ridiculous. So there are no common causes that, and foundations for special relationships anymore. I think Churchill was speaking about a time that no longer exists. And one of the main reasons is that Europe has relationships that are contingent upon, a military alliance. And I think that at the end of the day, you're going to see that's going to become a far more attractive model to Europe than sustaining this failed, you know, military alliance, which has lost all reason to exist, has become unaffordable and which frankly speaking is breaking Europe apart. The interesting thing about BRICS is there's no military aspect to it whatsoever. It's purely geopolitically, economically, you know, focused. And that's the future going forward. The future is not sustainment of a military industrial complex. The future is sustainment of global supply chains and, developing economic relationships that are mutually beneficial. I think you'll find, again, it always comes down to the economy. At the end of the day, if Poland becomes isolated, its economy crumbles, the politicians that are responsible for that will likewise fall. And you'll get a new group of Polish politicians in who will do what's necessary to stay politically viable. And that means that they're going to focus on the economic health of Poland. And that economic health be furthered by not alienating them with not just Russia, but their European, neighbors, Germany. This is what the United States should be working on while we still have influence in Europe and we still have influence, or we could get influence with Russia. This is what we should have as our focus, creating a stable Europe, post-conflict Europe that's not reliant upon the United States for security, that has realistic security aspirations, that don't view Russia as an imminent adversary. Therefore, you can bring military spending under control, focus on economic recovery. This is what really we should be doing, but we're not. I mean, we're letting Poland talk stupidly. Poland will find itself isolated if it tries to do this. There is infrastructure that goes across Polish soil that Poland could, but they'll pay a price. They'll become isolated. We're getting into the world of energy security. Germany has now become quite cognizant of the fact that its future economic health won't be viable unless they have access to cheap Russian gas. I think we're looking at a new reality where Poland and Germany will not be allies for much longer. They will become more than competitors, adversaries. I think the Russians aren't stupid. And I think the Russians redrawing the map of of, of Ukraine and getting Western nations to I think it'll revive feelings in Germany about territories that were ceded to Poland at the end of the Second World War. This is what the United States needs to stop. See, this is where strategic thinking on the part of the United States needs to come in. We need to step in, let Russia win in Ukraine because they've won, but we need to create a European security framework where this kind of nonsense isn't taking place. We need to preempt the Russian effort to divide Western Ukraine. You know, and this is where we could have leverage. We're not talking about putting Western troops in. We're not talking, but telling the Russians that the issue of the inviolability of borders, the rights of people, et cetera, there has to be a process that's done that doesn't allow this to create, emotions that run out of control and start talking about the breakup of Europe. But Trump, he's just not smart enough. He doesn't understand European history, doesn't understand the foundational elements that go into play, and, national competitions, et cetera. Not just that, but if you want American presence on the ground in Europe, you have to pay for it. He's talking about pulling out 20,000 troops. He's saying the troops that remain behind, you're paying for them, not us. We're doing you a favor. And I think what he's doing is creating the conditions that Europe can't meet, and therefore empowers him to say, well, then we're unplugging. We're not going to be doing this, forever. So I think that's some of the reasoning behind Donald Trump, that if you want us to be there, you got to pay for it. If you can't afford to pay for it, then we're going to leave. NATO has created a situation where Eastern Europe has been empowered into believing that they get to dictate the security for all of Europe. And I think France and Germany and Italy are not playing that game anymore. And so, how do you resolve these tensions without having Europe, break down and promote conflict between old Europe and new Europe? This is what the United States should be focused on, not on conflict we don't understand, a conflict we help create, but we don't understand at all. And we don't have any way to solve. There's nothing we can bring to the table to solve the conflict in Ukraine. The only thing we can do is make the price paid by the Ukrainians even higher by continuing the conflict. Right now, I think that we are headed towards a rupture between the United States and Europe and the end of NATO. But again, you never know with Donald Trump. He may decide that, peace through strength, and we've got to be strong, and therefore we're going to double down on, on Europe. But on the other hand, he just committed to building an Iron Dome in America, and the money that is needed for that, means that we probably aren't going to be doing much more ballistic missile defense in Europe. Saudi Arabia, the cost for a barrel is around $10. So that you can bring that price down as much as you want. Saudi Arabia is still going to be able to produce oil. But here's the problem. The United States. Since 2020, all of America's oil growth comes from the Permian Basin of West Texas. All of our new wells are there. The break-even point for an existing Permian Basin well is around $33. So if oil's at 45, they can still make some money. But for new wells, all of our new production, new wells, the average break-even point is $66. I think Donald Trump learned his lesson from the first 4 years that he was president, not to surround himself with people who thought that they could do a better job than the president could do. Donald Trump has made it clear that he is the president. He alone makes policy, and that if you're going to serve in his administration, you will be subordinated to his will, to his policy designs. And we even saw this with Marco Rubio, who was a one-time political, opponent of Donald Trump, has totally just caved. Marco Rubio is a man who makes it clear that he works for President Trump. He's also acknowledged that there will be places where he will not, tread, because it's Trump land, and Russian policy is one of those places. So that, that's where we're at. But the problem is they end up creating a bunch of yes men. Again, I just keep telling Donald Trump, hey, boss, give me an afternoon. Bring all your Russian people in, bring me in. And by the time we're finished, you'll fire all of them and you'll invite me back, because they're misleading you about Russia. And it's it's too bad. There is an opportunity here to solve not just the problem of Ukraine, but the problem of European security. And if Donald Trump was smart and properly advised, he would, and if this is done in terms of a business deal, we're talking about leveraging one property into a bigger property. That is letting the Russians get what they want in Ukraine, but making sure that what a post-conflict European security framework looks like is something the United States can live with, as opposed to being dictated to by a victorious Russia, where because we don't have a plan, because we thought that the issue was Ukraine when it's not Ukraine. Look, Donald Trump's a transactional person. He thinks everything comes down to transaction and greed. Because he's a man who has no principle, no moral foundation, no ideology other than money. He can't understand a nation that was willing to sacrifice so much to achieve a result that truly impacts it. The Russians didn't go to, war in Ukraine light. This is a big deal for them. This is about NATO expansion. This is about the future of Russia. This is about preserving Russian cultural heritage, everything. And so, you know, Russia's not going to give up all of that because Donald Trump got the price of oil to go to $45 a barrel. And again, it just shows how stupid Donald Trump is and how stupid his advisors are. Right now, I think the price of oil is about $78 a barrel. That's low. The break-even point for Saudi Arabia is in about $85. That's what they need to balance their budget. So Saudi Arabia right now is basically living off of their savings in order to do the United States and the world a favor during a political season where we didn't want gas prices to go up too much. But, and the other thing is the break-even point for Russian oil is about $1 a barrel. That's what it costs to produce. Russia needs oil up around $70 to balance their budget, maybe $75 to balance their budget. But to continue to produce oil, Russia needs it around above $41. That's about the average cost of a barrel out of the ground. So as long as it's above $41, Russia can continue to produce oil economically. They aren't going to sell enough or make enough to balance their budget, but they can continue to produce oil. Donald Trump is dumber than a box of bricks if he thinks this is a strategy that works. The other thing is, didn't he know what would happen the last time he played stupid game? This is what could happen. As the price lowers, the Saudis and the Russians just keep pumping oil out. And so now you have low oil, you have a glut, and the price shrinks even lower. And now it can drop down to $21 worth. The Saudis keep going to 10. There's certain oil fields in Russia that can produce oil at 12. And they'll just keep pushing. They'll keep pushing oil on the market. And you know what happens to all the American money? It loses all value. In fact, to own a barrel of oil costs you money because now you're going to have to pay the oil you have. There's no storage. And so having oil doesn't make you money. It costs you money. That's what happened back I think in 2020. The price of oil went from being, $30 a barrel to negative $18 a barrel. Is that really the game that Donald Trump's ready to play? And so he's failing to see that what he's doing is creating the conditions for Europe to become even more chaotic and anarchy ridden and violent. The potential of European wars is real. There is genuine animosity between Germany and Poland. It can be exacerbated. And if you have a European Union today, the head of the foreign ministry of the European Union, this Kallas girl, is talking about the breakup of Russia into its tiny little parts. I think Russia would be well advised to ensure that Europe gets broken up into tiny little parts and just let Europe be Europe. Donald Trump has spoken about withdrawing 20% of American forces from Europe in the near future. My advice to him is to pull all the troops out of Poland and watch what Poland does. See, Poland right now thinks that they're, we got American troops. We're the new Germany. Pull them all out, Donald. Get them all out of Poland. Shut down the American bases there. Just let Poland understand the reality that you're on your own. Therefore, you don't get to hide behind the shield of America anymore. All the stupidity that you're talking, you alone will pay the consequences for it. Good luck. And watch how quickly Poland changes it too. The same thing with the Baltics. watch how quickly they change their tune when they realize they don't have an American and a NATO shield anymore, that they suddenly have to learn how to live. You know, if you go around, you're 5'2" and you go around and you're poking the 6'4" person in the chest all the time because you got your 6'5" person over here. The 6'5" person leaves. You'll stop poking the 6'4" person in the chest. You'll stop in a heartbeat. That this is the kind of healthy environment Europe needs.